And if we are fearing foods, if we're feeling guilty about foods, that's not the way to live if you want to live life in a healthful and happy way, which I feel like we all do.
Welcome back to another episode of The Vegan View. So today we are so excited because we have a very special guest with us. She's with us virtually because she's in Texas. We have Brooke from Beets by Brooke. So Brooke is a medical student. She is getting her MD, and she also has an amazing Instagram page with so much information on it. And welcome, Brooke. We're so excited to have you here.
Hi. I can't even express how excited I am to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Of course, we're so excited. So I guess if you want to tell people what you're all about, like what your content is, and then also a little bit about your vegan story, that would be great.
So over at Beets by Brooke, the food Beets, I have a lot of different goals in mind. For one, I am sharing my journey just as a vegan medical student. There's a lot of ups and downs. I try to keep it as real as possible because I want to make sure I'm giving an authentic kind of representation of life, which I think social media could always have a little bit more of. I also try to approach nutrition and health in a way that's really inclusive, not only considering financial situations, cultural race, but also just making sure we're approaching nutrition in a way that's really good for our minds as well as our bodies, which sometimes is missing a little bit in some of the vegan nutrition world. And so I see a lot of value in that. And additionally from there, it's just a lot of the recipes I love. I've been touching on food waste a little bit and just trying to kind of cover all things there are in nutrition and health because it's complicated, but there's a lot of fun ways to kind of educate people. And so that's what I'm trying to do. So my personal vegan journey, I became vegetarian in middle school. I was just kind of curious, I loved animals. And so I tried it out and I loved it and I felt great. I definitely acknowledge I didn't have some of those cultural barriers I think some people did. Food wasn't a significant part in my family. And so it was a bit easier for me to transition. In high school, kind of similarly to a lot of people, I didn't think I could do it. Y'all, my idea of breakfast was a block of cheese in the morning. Like, I really thought that being vegan was never an option for me. But I kind of like some other people started watching some documentaries, and the combination of the compassion and the nutrition just really piqued my interest. And I thought that this lifestyle just made sense for what I'm interested in and my morals at the end of the day. And that is actually what piqued my interest in medicine. I hadn't realized how valuable diet and nutrition was in health. And at that point, I was about 17. So I've been vegan 8-9 years-ish now. I realized that no one had ever asked me about what I ate in healthcare. And that was really confusing to me, especially since I had a lot of stomach issues, which to me, A+B, you would ask about someone's diet. And so this really created a passion in me to want to kind of help bridge this gap of nutrition and healthcare because it exists naturally, but we're not really seeing it approached that much in our current Western medicine kind of situation. And I thought there was a lot of value going down this path and kind of using my voice to express a lot of things that we've known for a long time, but isn't always being prioritized. And so that's kind of where I am now.
Being that you are in the medical field, how do other people in the medical field approach your lifestyle? Do they have questions for you? How do you walk them through it? Because they're also professionals.
So in medicine, it's not even just veganism that they're curious about, but just prioritization of nutrition in general. There's such a lack of that currently. And so just being passionate about food and utilizing that as a way to properly treat patients holistically is something a lot of people are curious. I do try to be low key about being vegan because at the end of the day, there's so many waves, even just in nutrition, that need to happen in healthcare that I kind of try and take the baby steps. But at the end of the day, there's an overlap, right? Like between just general nutrition need and veganism. And that's just more incorporation of plants, which is what I really try to harp on. A lot of my classmates kind of just don't quite understand, I think, but I don't blame them. We're not really taught just the value and the importance of nutrition, because it's just not a focus in medicine as things are today for the most part. You'll get classes here and there, but the fact that they aren't graded or they're usually really short just kind of tells impressionable medical students that this isn't something to spend your time on. So I try and do it slowly but surely. Typically, I kind of let them come to me and just answer whatever questions there are. But I do see a lot of value in making sure that I'm not pushing it on them, because a lot of times people aren't so receptive to that. It's definitely been an uphill battle, but I'm really grateful because at my school in particular, there is a program called culinary medicine, which we can get into later. But that's been a great way to connect with other healthcare professionals and students who are passionate about this and who are a lot more receptive to kind of just hearing the potential that we can really make in terms of approaching food.
Yeah, I love that, because I can't count how many times I've gotten frustrated when, like, I've had family members in the hospital for, you know, certain things, and they're being fed dairy and cookies and like all this stuff, and I'm just like, it really frustrates me, and I'm just like, where are the green juices? Where are the salads? Like, where are the greens? Like, where are the fruits? And I get so frustrated. They give them a carton of milk and like some cookies. Like, here's to level out your blood sugar, and I'm just like, and it just really hurts me. But as someone who understands or believes that food is linked to health, it really frustrates me in Western medicine that there isn't more of that.
It's really unfortunate, especially when you consider how much money healthcare makes in the US. Like, there is no lack of money, but it's just not going to so much information that we know. Like, we've known about this stuff for decades. This is not new information. And so I definitely agree with you. Of course, there are going to be some patients who aren't interested, but to not even have the option because maybe it's more expensive, maybe it's hard to prepare, but it's really our goal to take care of patients to the best of our ability. I think that we can't achieve that if we're not giving people healthful food options. That's a great example of it.
If somebody like watching at home feels like they've either seen a doctor or that they have a family member that's seen a doctor and they've been given advice to eat more red meat. Like, I know I had some blood tests that came back and showed I had low iron a while back, and my doctor's suggestion was to eat more red meat. At the time I wasn't vegan. I was like, I am eating red meat. But I think about that moment often, like if they were to tell that to me now, you know, that wouldn't work for me. So what advice do you have for people who feel like maybe they didn't get the best advice from their doctor, or maybe they want to, you know, propose a different route for their healthcare journey?
I have to give a shout out to dietitians. For the most part, they dedicate so much of their time and knowledge to nutrition. Unfortunately, I also acknowledge that not everyone has easy access to a dietitian. And so if you do, if it's within your realm or your insurance, I would definitely explore that, because at the end of the day, most physicians do not get sufficient nutrition education, and we see this across the board. I'm even currently doing research right now that's only just confirming this fact. And so while, of course, physicians mean well, and I can't emphasize that enough, a lot of it is just an ignorance and a lack of education. And I feel like ignorance, people, is such a negative connotation, but it just means you don't know something. It doesn't mean that you're being malicious or anything like that. So I really do recommend that while we are in a society, rightfully so, where we really trust physicians, you know, I'm going through the path now, y'all. It is hard work. You have to dedicate and sacrifice so much. But that doesn't magically mean that we're always going to be proficient in every single topic. And so what I recommend to people is definitely seeking out sources and voices that have spent a significant time understanding and studying nutrition. And a lot of that time is not going to be whatever physician you find, which is, you know, which makes sense because it's not prioritized. It's hard to even have a life outside of medicine, never alone research nutrition on top of that. And I think it's really valuable to just understand that not everything a doctor or anyone says is 100%, which only adds to confusion. And I absolutely acknowledge that, but physicians are humans too, and we need to remember that. So I really recommend to take nutrition information with a grain of salt, unless the physician has kind of articulated that this is an area of study that they're really familiar with, which is not typically the case. And understand that it is possible to be a credible source in some things, but not everything. And understand that any kind of advice that you get, you might need to do a little more digging, which is going to take extra time. And that's one of the reasons why I am really passionate about how we can reform nutrition education, medical education, because it shouldn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be the responsibility of patients, but that's kind of the situation we're in right now.
I'm curious if you feel like medicine is always the answer, because I think a lot of times people, when they go see their doctor, they are prescribed, they might be prescribed a medicine. And how do we differentiate that as patients, knowing whether that would be a good route to go, or if we should look at something else? And then to kind of tack on to that, how helpful do you think our diet is when it comes to our overall health?
In all parts of medicine, we are supposed to encourage patients to seek other opinions. And I believe that when it comes to medication, that should be the case. At the end of the day, medication is extremely important. It is life-saving. We've made so many, waves in this, and it's really valuable. But at the end of the time, sometimes we can be a little medication heavy before we approach other options. And it's tricky in medicine now that I've kind of seen the other side, is because sometimes patients really don't have the capacity to drastically change their life or do other things. But at the same time, this comes to a similar theme, is that we often just aren't even giving them the option to explore it. And so it really depends. Not every disease is going to be, maybe medication, maybe not. But there is a spectrum. And so just like anything else, I really encourage people to get a second or third opinion, especially if it's something that you may have to take for the rest of your life, because you want to be intentional about that. You want to make sure you do your research. And I do believe that food can be significantly powerful, especially when it comes to helping. The idea of it curing, again, it's kind of tricky to talk about this because it really depends on what you're talking about. And at the end of the day, health is so individualized. It has to be, because we're talking stress levels, hormone levels, what you have going on at home. So many different things can play a role in this. And nutrition is definitely a component of that. I think it's really valuable for patients to understand that nutrition is one of many realms, like sleeping better, like medication, to approach our health and certain ailments. But it's really going to depend on the situation. So I truly believe in my heart, I wouldn't gone to medical school for nutrition if I didn't believe in the power of it. I believe it's really important for patients to understand that, like medication, nutrition is another component to treating whatever you're worried about. That being said, there actually has been kind of controversy over the term food as medicine recently. And I think that's because when people hear a phrase, they often take it as black and white. A lot of times, especially in the work that I do, using the term food as medicine, it doesn't mean that food is necessarily replacing medicine, but that it is yet another path you can approach in improving your health. And I think that's extremely valuable. It's going to look different. And unfortunately, the thing is that nutrition is just hard to study. And that's why I really urge people to always figure out what makes them feel good, what goes in their life, because it has to be individualized, or you're not going to approach the best solution for your personal situation.
So obviously you're passionate about veganism and you're studying about nutrition. You know so much. What would you say to those people who tried to go vegan for like a month and then said that they had all these health problems and that it just wasn't for them? It's not a proper diet, I guess.
So to those people, I would say to really take a step back and figure out what they're eating and kind of what may be lacking. Because at the end of the day, just like approaching any other thing, especially if you're talking about food, kind of like we talked about, it can be really impactful. And that's why you have to be really intentional. I do believe that for a majority of people, vegan, plant-based is a lifestyle that many can approach in a healthful way. And if they want to explore it, but maybe are having some road bumps in the road, they should definitely take some steps back. I think we live in a society where it's very all or nothing. And that oftentimes isn't that realistic, especially when you're considering, depending on their age, someone could be eating a certain way for decades. Like, that's not nothing, especially if there's cultural, financial kind of connection to it. And so I really recommend people take it slow. If you went from 0 to vegan for an entire month, of course you're going to have some kind of negative impact. I think what people forget is that our bodies are constantly trying to maintain some semblance of balance called homeostasis. And this is a survival tactic, right? We want to always accommodate and adapt to whatever we're doing, and we're going to adjust. The way I like to describe it is that within our body, there's equations all the time, and our body's always trying to keep those equations balanced. If all of a sudden you decide to, lift one of the parts of the equation down the other one, it makes sense that your body's going to react poorly. And of course, it's going to look different for everyone, but that makes sense because we're constantly trying to have balance. So if you shift something all of a sudden, it would be weird if you didn't have some kind of reaction to it. A great simplified example is if you wake up at 10 every day and also you wake up at 6, you're going to feel bad because your body's not familiar with it. And it's similar to any other change in your life. And so people say it's not for them, but want to pursue it more, I really recommend taking a few steps back and figuring out how they can incorporate in a way that's going to be intentional and gradual, and really make sure they are finding credible sources to make sure that they are getting all the health benefits they need. There are a few things, and it really depends on what you're eating, but I feel like most vegans know it kind of takes you a while to get the swing of things, and it's definitely no exception for anyone else.
So I appreciate medicine. I appreciate doctors because, there have been times where I've had to seek treatment and pretty much got my life saved. But I guess my qualm I have is that I feel like a lot of times with medicine, we get treated with things that just kind of cover up the problem instead of healing the problem. And I wonder if it's because, if we go directly to the source, they don't make as much money. The Western medicine doesn't make as much money. So I guess I'm just wondering, do you know why nutrition isn't more of a thing that is taught? Because, I take ibuprofen for my cramps every month. I literally have to. And I've been seeking out herbal supplements and stuff, and they have helped, but until I get to that point, I need my 800 milligram ibuprofen, and that's just covering up the problem instead of actually fixing my hormonal imbalance. So I guess what I'm wondering is, with Western medicine, do you think it's because it's just money hungry, and it's no, we just need to subscribe pills for this and that and that and that, instead of oh, these things, other things might actually heal the problem, so you don't have to depend on the pills for the rest of your life?
A phenomenal question. And honestly, that's one of the reasons that brought me to medicine, was that I felt a similar frustration and there seems to be a different way. So it's definitely a complicated thing that's rooted in a lot of history. Like I hinted at before, nutrition research in and of itself is really hard to do because unless you have people in a same room eating the exact same things all the time, even then you can't quite measure it because we have stress hormones and all this other stuff. While medications, you can research very easily to say oh, did they take it? Did they not take it? Placebo. It's a lot more clear cut. And so you have that component of it. Western medicine is very more, they try and stick to basic sciences, and it's just hard to study food because even if you say low fat or low sugar, what does that mean? That could mean so many different things. That could mean you're eating fruit. It could also mean you're eating cereal. It could mean so many different things. And so I always urge people to be careful in nutrition studies, but I think that's definitely a component. But on a similar end, we're able to study medications more and they're able to make more money. Big pharma is a huge part of medicine and something I personally have always been really frustrated about. There's a lot of different things on it. There's a lot of different holds on medications. People that need life-saving ones that they can't get to because they won't allow other brands to utilize their equations. There's a lot of stuff that's frustrating in it. And at the end of the day, it also makes a lot of money. And so it would be ignorant to say that that's not a component as well. And then another thing too is that it kind of goes both ways. I think that people fall back on this excuse a little too much, in my personal opinion. But the idea is that some patients do want quick fixes. And that's just the truth. Some people want that. And it's a lot easier, especially when people can, leave bad reviews for doctors. They can leave other doctors, which is already an issue in and of itself. If that they don't even want to, a doctor didn't want to give a quick fix, sometimes a patient could retaliate on that. And so just overall, as a field, there's just more and quicker reward to procedures and medications than there are to nutrition. It's really hard to monetize nutrition. Some people have tried doing it in different ways. And I'm not saying these are the only reasons, but there's some of it. And so I really hope moving forward, things get better. I feel like it has to, because right now we're set up for quick fixes. And then as a culture, we just yell at people who are unhealthy, and it doesn't add up. And it's really, I feel like, putting the blame on the wrong part, especially when you consider different financial access to healthcare as well. And so it has to be a systematic approach to a systematic issue. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. But I hear you, and honestly, I feel similar, and it's a really tricky situation. I believe, I try to be optimistic. I think we're moving towards better, but it could definitely happen a little faster, in my opinion.
I'm glad you brought up the systemic issues, because I think that's something I think about a lot, is how sometimes it's not always accessible to find an MD that you really, jive with. And is that your cat? So cute.
I don't know if you can see his whisker. He was kind of sniffing the
See
phone.
these little whiskers? Sometimes I think it's hard for people to find a doctor that they jive with, or that they feel like is helping them with their issues because of accessibility. Because I don't know exactly. I'm sure you could probably explain it better why it's so inaccessible, but I know, insurance has something to do with it, location, where people live, and things like that. But I would love for you to touch more on that and maybe offer some tips if there's any that could help people out.
I wish I did have more to say on this, because I'm halfway through medical school. Everything so far has been like textbooks and theoretical things. Insurance does play a role, because at the end of the day, you can't always access every single physician with your insurance. And so that's a component of it. But then even if you can, I do find that you can shop around a bit for physicians within your insurance. I believe there's a website called ZocDoc, like ZocDoc, where you can type in your insurance and see who will take it. And so that will allow you flexibility. And that just takes a little time, a little energy. If I said that wrong, there's definitely a similar website. And then also the real fact that some people don't have insurance, which I feel like that's a talk for another day in the US, how we approach healthcare. But yeah, a lot of times those who might specialize in some of these things, sometimes they're doing private practices because that's the only way they can, practice the way they want to, which is really frustrating. But a lot of times you'll find that those are harder to take insurances. So that's definitely kind of a broad overview of that.
So I have a devil's advocate question going back to medicine. And as someone who's, vegan, but also studying to be an MD and in school to become an MD, how do you approach the vegan community that is like anti-medicine and that thinks that maybe the only solution is like herbs and food? Because sometimes I think that is the majority of it, and a lot of our health problems come from the way we eat, but it can't always be the solution. So like, how do you approach that to that specific part of the vegan community that is like so anti-medicine?
The way I try to approach this is to really educate on accessibility. When you're talking about food being the only option, you are missing the glaring fact that so many people don't have access to that. And to me, that's a huge part of being passionate about medicine, is because some people can't access, a lot of people, I'm talking millions of people in the US are food insecure, can't access fresh food and herbs. A lot of these things are, let's just say for it is overpriced. And so when you are ignoring the potential that medicine has, I think one way that I approach it is definitely educating that that's a very privileged way to see the world. If that works for you, if you want to explore that for yourself, do what you want. Like I'm all about autonomy. If that's how you want to approach medicine, if that's how you want to approach your personal health, then that's fair. I do think there's a lot of value in it, at the very least, making sure you're getting checkups to whatever you're doing to kind of confirm that, yes, this is working. Because at the end of the day, there are some ailments that you can't always notice clearly, and they may creep on slowly. And so I think no matter what you're doing, there's a lot of value to be said in going at the very least to get checkups to say, okay, maybe I'm approaching life this way. It works for me. Let's confirm that in a more objective way. And again, if that's not what you want to do, that's not what you want to do. And I think that on my page personally, in the way I approach, if someone's really, bent on having that approach, then I might not be the account for you. And that's okay. In the community overall, if people are not open to hearing different perspectives, then I think that's more on them than it is on me. And it's not mine or any other creator's responsibility to try and totally change their mindset sometimes.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's great.
fully agree. I think that's the beautiful thing about this community, is that there's so many different approaches, and there's so many different, people and opinions. And if we all thought the same, we all felt the same, that'd just be very culty.
Absolutely. And again, I think, there's nothing, wrong with that. It's important to have autonomy, and it's important that everybody's different. I think when it becomes an issue is when you try and make your style the end all be all for everyone else. That's not the case for anyone. That's not the case for, over prescribing. That's not the case for no prescription whatsoever. That's not the case at all. And a lot of social media, I think, rewards voices like that. But that's just really closed-minded, and it is always rooted, in my opinion, in privilege in some way.
I have a question. I'm very curious. Are you the only vegan in your classes?
I'm really excited to say that I'm not the only vegan in my class.
Yay.
It's amazing. Yeah. I was so hyped, y'all. I was not expecting that. A lot of people are vegetarian for cultural reasons or personal reasons, but I believe in my class, there's 2 other vegans, and I've already bonded with a vegan in the first year class. And so there might even be more. I don't know yet, but yeah, I'm not the only one. And all things considering percentage-wise, my class is pretty big, but that's still pretty exciting. And I'm really glad to say that even in my culinary medicine class, the doctor who leads it is not fully vegan, but is very supportive of plant-centered, plant-based, and everything that I've talked to her about, she really understands my point of view. And so those who are interested in nutrition, I find, are pretty open-minded to the lifestyle.
That's amazing.
Do you find that maybe other professors who aren't vegan give you a little bit of pushback, or do they ever challenge you, or do you find yourself in a frustrating situation or conversation with them?
So far, I have not, but I think that also kind of comes to, I try to be low key about it. I think it is really valuable to kind of let them find out and then come to me. So far, the only time it's come up, I was giving a presentation, and someone in a very open-minded way said that a lot of, again, nutrition studies, when it comes to results from plant-based eating, there's so many confounding variables, which for anyone who doesn't know out there is a component of a study that is not being studied, but is very likely impacting the end result. And when you think about plant-based eating, you're likely thinking about people who, again, have access to fresh food. Typically, those who are plant-based above average are more athletic and maybe have less stress in their life because they have less financial stresses. And so they commonly brought up that, like, okay, nutrition studies are hard because there's typically confounding variables. But even then, that's just a fact. So luckily, nothing has been extreme pushback, but I also stay relatively low key because I do want to be organic kind of conversation where it comes up naturally. But stay tuned because I'm sure that it will come up soon.
Oh, yes. I would love to know if you've learned anything in your studies so far about supplementation. We just had a conversation earlier about B12, and we're pretty mixed about, like, some of us take it every day, some of us barely take it at all, some of us just get it from nutritional yeast. So we're like, what's the consensus here? So I'd love to know if there's any talks in your classes about, like, you know, B12 or D3, and, like, is it just a vegan thing? Like, should only vegans be supplementing?
This is a great question. Honestly, sometimes in medicine, a lot of times in medicine, it's almost easier to give a stereotypical patient, and there's definitely an overemphasis on vegans not getting B12, which really frustrates me because for me personally, I would take B12 on and off, but then when I got my blood levels checked, I was fine. I think some people forget that it does stay in your liver for 7 years, which is not nothing. This is very unique, especially for a non-fat soluble vitamin, that for it to stay in your body like that. But on the flip side, B12 is also extremely, extremely important. If your reserves do run out, this is a serious concern. And this kind of comes back to the same thing we're talking about. Okay, yeah, live life eating things, but maybe you should get things checked up, especially if you are a vegan who's planning not to take supplement with B12, right? So it's kind of tricky because on one end, it stays for 7 years, which there was a practice question once that talked about someone who recently went vegan. And one of the trick answers was like their B12 being low, but the question acknowledged that no, that wouldn't happen right away because you have stores for so long. So I was like, okay, question, like we're finally, we're answering this the right way, which was awesome. And so many people got it wrong because a lot of times schools like, oh, vegan, B12, which I thought was really frustrating. When we had a talk on it, the doctor was like, they should be getting shots, all this other stuff. Versus if you have a vegan patient, you should ask them, like, how are you approaching B12? You don't ever want to assume in any situation that someone like is or is not approaching something in a healthful way. And yet we see that a lot. I personally, I'm sure y'all understand, I've had some really awkward situations with physicians who literally just laugh at me because I was vegan. But I did have one, and it's funny, it's always that one that kind of gives you hope. I told the doctor I had some issues, kind of looked at my diet a little bit, and they got better. And I was telling her that I was exploring nutrition, and she responded you probably know more about nutrition than I do. And I was like, wow, that humility is so important in healthcare, and we don't see it enough. Everyone, again, we're humans, which means we make mistakes, but we also need to understand that there's a lot out there that we don't know. And I don't think we always see that. So to answer your question, for the most part, vegans are more at a concern, right? Because it is fortified in a lot of food, but it's also fortified in a lot of vegan food. Like for me personally, I'll take one a few times a week, but I love me some nutritional yeast. My milk usually has it in it. I think a lot of modern vegans naturally get it in a lot of different sources. But again, I can't emphasize enough, especially if you've been vegan for maybe more than 4 years, I would get tested at least once if you can, because it is no joke if it is depleted. For D3 or D in general, I definitely believe everyone should be taking that. They did a study, even just in Dallas, I think over 90% of people were deficient in vitamin D. There's a lot of different reasons for this, not being outside as much, or those who have darker skin, but just in general, it's hard to get from food. And so I personally, based on my research, recommend D3 for everyone, regardless. We see this in everyone, which is kind of tricky because sometimes they'll be like, oh, vitamin D deficiency was linked to this, but like most people are deficient in vitamin D deficiency. So it's probably linked to like a lot of different things,
I love what you said about humility, because I think a lot of times people go to their doctors as this is the end all be all, like whatever the doctor says is so. But I do want to ask a question that I feel like viewers who may not be vegan may want to know, is about protein. Because a lot of people, they depend on protein. They're like, protein. Like, where do you know how many times I get asked, where do you get your protein? I'm like, plants from the source. Like,
Is that healthy?
Right, exactly. So can you like kind of explain the difference between like animal protein and vegetable protein, and like that it's okay that we're vegan and we still get protein?
I want to start off with the average American gets about 4 times, if not more, protein than our bodies actually need. There is such a misrepresentation in like marketing and social media about promoting the protein of food. We should not be promoting the protein of food. Like, everyone gets enough protein. Y'all, I was just at the farmer's market and someone was selling edamame beans, which, don't get me wrong, they were delicious. But they were like, yeah, it's really important because not enough people get protein. And I was like, oh my goodness. And they were just saying that for everyone. But again, it sells. When you are able to put a lot of misinformation out there, people follow these trends. And so honestly, if I see a package and it's like promoting the protein, I'm like, well, they're just trying to hop on the bandwagon. So first of all, most people in general get way too much protein, but also we've seen in most studies that vegans and vegetarians get enough protein. If you are eating some really nutritional, oh my goodness, if you are eating nutrient-dense foods, and a lot of times that's the tofu, the legumes, the lentils, the whole grains, so many of these have protein in them. And it's really valuable to understand that the benefit of plant protein is that most of it comes with fiber. We are so obsessed with protein when we're getting more than we need, and yet majority, and when I say majority, I mean the majority of people do not get the minimum amount of fiber. And that is the beauty of plant-based protein, because nearly all of it comes with so much more fiber. And regardless of, what your lifestyle is, everyone can benefit from plant protein because it's typically more nutrient dense. Of course, yes, there's some nutrients in animal stuff, but when it comes to as a whole, what we are lacking, most people, are the nutrients that are in plant protein. And so it's wild that this misconception continues in 2021. I even just seeing these questions asked, I'm like, oh yeah, I forget people don't know that. But to me, it's one of the basic things. People get more than enough protein, and everyone can benefit from plant-based protein.
Thank you for clearing that up, because we are tired of.
We're literally nodding like this.
We're literally winning. Like, eating plant-based is a win.
Thank you so much. Finally, I have a video to send to every person who asks me where I get my protein. I'm going to be like, watch this episode of The Vegan View, skip to this part. Thank you very much.
So here's another one. Here's something else that people ask about all the time. I'm concerned about estrogen. Why would I consume so much soy? Can you tell us, can you break down some of those misconceptions?
Yeah, so it's really valuable to understand the origin of a lot of fad misconceptions, right? And a lot of the ones with soy were studies where people were drinking like disgustingly huge amounts of soy. But people don't forget, like, when you drink a lot of water, you can also get water toxicity. Like, if you have too much of anything, you're going to get sick. And this comes back to the same thing of, like, our bodies want balance. If you have too much of something, that's not what we're meant for. We're meant for a lot of different components. And a lot of other studies were rat studies as well. So estrogen overall has not been shown to have negative effects or even act as estrogen. There are certain hormonal conditions where you have to look out for it, but hopefully those who have those conditions will be aware of that. From my understanding, thyroid, but even then there's a lot of misconception about breast cancer because people, I think, forget that we're not, like, America's not the only country here. There are so many countries for generations that have been consuming soy, and we don't see disproportionate amounts of breast cancer or hormonal imbalances there. And so all in all, again, soy is a plant protein that has lots of fibers, and it's a different type of estrogen. The phytoestrogen in soy doesn't act in our bodies in the same way. And I think it's sometimes hard for people to wrap their mind around that. They hear like A plus B equals C, estrogen in soy equal my estrogen levels are going to go up. But that's not, a body's more complicated than that. We need to give the body more respect because it really is so much more complex. And just because something's an estrogen doesn't mean it's going to act the same way. And it sometimes it can even be beneficial. So all in all, unless you have very specific hormonal issues, soy is not something that needs to be avoided, especially if it's like tempeh or edamame or something that, again, has that protein fiber that most people are lacking. And so we see in studies that especially when soy replaces like something like red meat, there's usually positive health benefits.
Wow, that's amazing.
I've also, I noticed that a lot of people that are concerned about the estrogen in soy still consume dairy and other products that would actually have estrogen as opposed to phytoestrogens.
I have to say, I think so much of my research lately has been focusing on plants that I don't really feel credible enough to touch on that. But I do agree that that makes sense, But to kind of add something interesting is that people forget that at around age 4 to 6, majority of people lose the enzyme called lactase that digests milk. And this to me is the clearest indication that we are not meant to consume milk. That's literally our bodies telling us that past 4 to 6, we're not supposed to consume milk. Of course, some people have so when people talk about this mutation, it means that they keep the lactase enzyme. And for a lot of people, especially communities of color, this isn't the case. And so I think it's really valuable. I even actually brought this up to my culinary medicine doctor, who again consumes dairy. I kind of just, casually went up to her and I was like, hey, so if we lose this at 4 to 6, what do you think that means? And she said that means we're not really designed to consume dairy past a certain age. And so while the estrogen in that, I think, is a little bit of a gray area, it to me is very biologically clear that we do not need or have to consume dairy unless you are smaller. And even then, the best source of that is from a mom of humankind.
So does that mean like ages 4 to 6, we should stop consuming like mother's breast milk as well?
So that's a little tricky. I think that would be hard to get research on that just because most people don't consume milk past 6. And so I think there's probably not enough information to really assume that. But again, it comes down to the same thing where some people are going to have that mutation. And so it's not going to be an issue. So yeah, I think it's a little too soon to say just because it's not common practice, but it really kind of depends on the individual person and kind of when they lose that lactase enzyme, because it's going to be different, especially depending on the race.
So the mutation that you speak of, that means that they are able to process lactase? And so it's more common to not be able to process lactase.
Yeah, so I may have misspoke. So lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose.
Okay. I misspoke.
But yeah, lactase is the enzyme in our body that digests and breaks down the sugar lactose. And for most people, that ability, that enzyme kind of stops being created past the age of 4 to 6.
Ooh,
I hope everyone heard that.
We got a fact check video.
When I learned that, I was in class and I was like, did y'all just hear this? Like, am I the only one who heard this? I'd heard of it before, but learning it at medical school, I felt like an out-of-body experience. I'm like, this is the clearest indication that, again, if I don't judge people, I don't shame food, but to ever tell someone that you need to drink milk is just like an objective biological inaccuracy, honestly.
It's so crazy to think that we've been conditioned for so long to think that this is the case. Like, I grew up drinking a glass of whole milk with dinner. I'm pretty sure my parents still do. My grandpa I know still does. It's like very conditioned in us that we need to drink milk for nutrition. And I remember
when I was younger, I had a doctor tell me, if you don't drink it, you're going to get osteoporosis, which is, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because I've heard that it's the opposite. But yeah, it's so crazy that, you know, for so long we've been conditioned, and hopefully, I mean, it's great that you're learning, you know, in your classes that it's not, and that other people are too, because goodness.
Yeah, I will say they didn't see it, I think, in the quite light that I saw it, just with what I know, but it definitely was really beneficial and just gave me, like y'all are seeing right now, ammo to just people who might not quite understand that. So osteoporosis in milk, I believe, still is a bit of a gray area, but that really comes back to vitamin D. Vitamin D is responsible for regulating calcium. And so vitamin D is definitely an approach if you want to look at osteoporosis. And that, again, is for everyone, because so many people, vegan or not, are deficient in vitamin D. And we see this across the board. And then also when it comes to osteoporosis, just general hormonal health. And so that's going to look different for everyone, look different depending on your biological sex. And I just wanted to really emphasize real quick, when you talked about the thinking that you needed milk to be healthy, is that we really need to prioritize examining marketing when we think about nutrition, because so much of the information out there, really the origins of that is a company trying to market a product to get money. If you ever hear information about nutrition, the first thing I ever want someone to do is, what is the goal of this person telling me this? And that's even true on social media. Like, even influencers, you can still have valuable information, but a lot of times a company is telling that person exactly what to say, and that's still coming from the company itself, which their end goal is to sell a product. It doesn't mean it's always wrong. It doesn't mean it's not great. But what it means is that you should probably do your own research if you're going to really utilize that information in your life.
You mentioned influencers, and obviously in the past there's been a lot of vegan influencers that have gone back on being vegan and said that eating fish and eggs has benefited them, and they've gone back. What is it, do you think, that they found in fish and eggs, or that made them feel better, or do you think it was like a placebo? Like, what is it that fish and eggs have that a plant-based diet doesn't?
I think it could be a combination of things. It's definitely fair to say that some omega-3s, you have to slightly be a little more intentional as vegan. So this could be a supplement, this could be, walnut, chia, flax. Not every single vegan you find is going to be having adequate amounts of that, while you might see a lot of people eat fish and eggs on a regular basis. So there's definitely still ways to get some of those nutrients, but not everyone could be approaching it right. And I think it could be placebo, because while they may have added fish and eggs, there's a chance that they also could have been restricting themselves in other ways. There's a lot of reward for being, like a raw vegan and all this other stuff, but it's honestly really hard and unrealistic for a majority of people to do that in a convenient way that gets all your nutrients. And so it's really valuable for people in those situations to not blame everything on veganism in general, but really acknowledge that this is complicated. Maybe for them it was better, but again, that could reflect there was some kind of restriction or something missing in their previous kind of way of eating. But yeah, it's complicated. And I think we've seen in a lot of people, y'all, myself including, that it is possible to live this way. But at the same time, if that's what's best for them, that's what's best for them. I don't think they should be necessarily throwing veganism under the bus for it.
Right. And I think if we look at, not everyone obviously, but if we look at a lot of these influencers that did have this, we can see that a lot of them had a low fat diet. And then we start thinking about how important healthy fats, from plant sources are to our diet, and how that could be a cause for all those issues.
There was a lot of restricting, definitely, like you said. So you definitely,
Veganism is not, we're not immune to unrealistic forms of restrictive eating. I mean, it's fair to say that for some people, veganism in general can be hard to obtain, but there's a lot of, again, rewarding for like just fruits and vegetables, which are great, but like whole grains, the healthy fats, the nuts, the seeds, I think sometimes aren't always like rewarded on social media as much. And so it's really valuable to understand that any person can be susceptible to restriction to the point of missing out nutrients. And so I think that is valuable to acknowledge. I don't know what they're eating every day. Y'all don't know. No one ever shows everything, but it's always clear that nutrition is complicated and it's personal. And so saying that it's one thing that they did just wouldn't make sense to me.
Wow, I wish you were my doctor.
Maybe one day. It's a long path for sure, but I really do try with my page to like bust misconceptions, because I think that is one of the most valuable things we can do, especially when we're constantly inundated with this, is that having some of these health myths busted by credible sources on social media. There's definitely a lot of voices out there. So making sure we're intentional about the content we're finding and following is just really important.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what the audience can find on your page?
Yeah, so a lot of what I've been doing is very just realistic approaches to nutrition. I've been recently talking a lot about the anti-diet, more intuitive eating approach, but I find a lot of value in. And I think sometimes people might be kind of confused on how you can be vegan and anti-diet, but I think that's kind of like looking at veganism as a diet, which most people who are vegan are not. You know, I definitely am vegan for compassionate and moral reasons. And to me, there's still a lot of opportunities to explore that and still finding food that satisfies me and I don't feel restricted mentally. So that's a lot of my approach. I think a lot of people, diet culture is so tightly ingrained in society that people aren't always even aware of how it could be negatively impacting their life. And so one of the parts of my page is definitely trying to encourage people to recognize ways that they could be happier and healthier, because again, mental health is a component of health. And if we are fearing foods, if we're feeling guilty about foods, that's not the way to live if you want to live life in a healthful and happy way, which I feel like we all do. So that's what I try and do. I've been focusing a lot on food waste because I feel like this is a very unique part of nutrition where everyone can benefit. We're not throwing away as much stuff that's going into the trash, and we're also saving money. Like that's like everyone wants those two things, right? And yet there's so many ways, just like here and there, to depending on what produce you use, and this is usually all plants, to make sure they're not wasting food. So that's something I've been doing, and also just kind of my journey of hearing misconceptions, trying to bust them, and figuring out how we can just approach nutrition in a way that encourages plants, but also encourages inclusivity.
Well, we have been talking for an hour now. I feel like we could talk to you forever. This was so much fun. Let's end on a fun question. So if you could tell us what's your one like favorite vegan meal, like, you know, if you were on a desert island, like that's the meal you would bring with you.
That's a great question. I gotta say a really hearty sweet potato chili is probably my go-to. I find that it just hits the spot. I also love it because you can pair it, like if we're feeling veggie, we can pair it with broccoli, we can pair it with mac and cheese for like a nice little chili mac. I find that, you know, get some lentils in there, get some quinoa in there, maybe some, you know, veggie crumbles, whatever you're in the mood for. And I like it spicy personally. So.
I was going to ask you if you liked it spicy.
Oh yeah. I have a rule that if I don't sneeze while I'm cooking, then we gotta look at the spices because
Oh my God, have you ever put like vegan sour cream on your chili?
Yes, oh my goodness, just hits a spot. That tartness and the creaminess. No, I like to go all out depending on how busy I am. That's probably what I'd bring.
That sounds so good right now.
That's a good one. All
Yeah,
right.
shooting stuff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for coming
This
on.
is amazing.
Yeah.
We learned so much.
Yeah, we appreciate you so much. Thank you for taking this time with us.
Yeah, and make sure you...
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Make sure you guys are following her. We will link everything in the description box down below. Go give her some love. And don't forget to like this video if you found it helpful. Subscribe. And we will see you guys next week for another episode.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you.